You thought your holiday season was about peace, joy, and family. But what if it's something far darker? This isn't the Christmas story you know. No snowflakes, no jolly Santa, no warm firesides. Instead, picture a Christmas night where something ancient stirs. Something that only wakes up once every 100 years. And it's coming for you. We all know the classic Christmas stories, the ones about giving, kindness, and warmth. The ones about Santa sneaking into houses to leave presents. It's a time of cheer, a season that promises peace and joy. But what if the true story behind Christmas wasn't about good cheer at all? What if the holiday had a dark, twisted secret buried beneath all the decorations, lights, and goodwill? This is the terrifying tale of a Christmas that no one will ever forget, a night when a forgotten evil awakens, and there's no escape. So, as you celebrate this Christmas, remember, not all gifts are meant to be opened. It was the night before Christmas, and everything seemed perfect. The decorations were up, the tree was twinkling, and the scent of cinnamon and pine filled the air. Sarah and her family had gathered at her parents' house, all set for the usual Christmas Eve traditions. Gifts were wrapped, stockings hung with care, and a hot fire crackled in the hearth. But this year felt different. There was a chill in the air that couldn't be ignored. Something unsettling about the quiet. The kind of quiet that made you look over your shoulder when you thought no one was there. Sarah had heard the rumors, strange things that happened during the holidays. Things her grandmother used to tell her about when she was a little girl. But those were just stories, weren't they? Old folklore passed down to scare kids into behaving. Or so she thought. As the night wore on, strange things started to happen. The lights flickered. The temperature dropped in the house, and, even though the fireplace was roaring, Sarah couldn't shake the chill that clung to her skin. Then, at midnight, it happened. A knock at the door. No one was supposed to be coming over. Sarah's parents were asleep, and the only people in the house were family. But when Sarah opened the door, there was no one there. Just snow, falling heavy from the sky. She glanced around, but it was as if the world itself had gone silent. Then, she saw something, a figure standing in the distance. A tall, shadowy shape that didn't belong, even in the winter darkness. Before she could make sense of it, the wind howled and the door slammed shut. Something was coming. Something older and more sinister than anyone could have imagined. Over the next few hours, Sarah and her family couldn't escape the growing unease. The house was unusually cold, and shadows seemed to move on their own. Her younger brother, Jason, swore he saw something in the reflection of the window. But when he turned to look, nothing was there. At dinner, their grandmother, who had always been a little odd, but still loved Christmas, started to talk about something that made Sarah's blood run cold. "Did you ever hear about the Yule demon?" her grandmother asked, her voice unusually soft. Sarah laughed nervously, thinking it was another one of her grandmother's strange stories. "Grandma, don't start with that stuff. You know the Yule demon's just a myth." But her grandmother didn't smile. "The Yule demon isn't a myth," she said, her eyes narrowing. "It's very real, and it's coming for you." Sarah's family brushed it off, but the odd events didn't stop. That night, as Sarah was about to turn off the lights, she heard the faint sound of footsteps in the attic above her room. She told herself it was just the house settling, but something inside her told her otherwise. The whispers started shortly after. Low, guttural whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. When she checked the attic, she found nothing, no footprints, no signs of anyone being up there. But when she turned to leave, something caught her eye. A shadow, flickering in the corner. It was tall and thin, but it wasn't a person. Her heart raced. She knew something was terribly wrong. And then, it all became clear. The Yule demon wasn't a myth, and it was coming for her family. It was just past midnight when Sarah heard the scratching. At first, it was soft, almost like an animal trying to claw its way into the house. But then it grew louder, more frantic. And then, the door to the living room slammed open with a force so powerful, it sent the Christmas tree toppling to the ground. The lights flickered again, but this time they didn't come back on. In the darkness, Sarah saw something move. It was tall, hunched over, its long limbs scraping the floor as it crawled into the room. The air turned frigid, colder than it had ever been before. It smelled of dirt and rot. The creature's face was a grotesque mask of twisted, ancient terror, with hollow eyes that seemed to bore into her soul. Its mouth stretched wide into a grin, sharp, jagged teeth shining in the darkness like daggers. "Who's been naughty?" it hissed, its voice a raspy, echoing growl that made Sarah's blood run cold. Panic gripped her heart as she backed away, but her feet wouldn't move fast enough. Her family was paralyzed with fear, unable to scream, unable to run. The creature didn't care for them. It was after her. Sarah. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. "It's coming for you." The Yule demon was here, and there was nowhere to hide. The Yule demon, an ancient spirit tied to the darkest corners of winter, had awakened. It came not just for the naughty children, but for those foolish enough to disturb its rest. It had waited for centuries to return, and now, on this Christmas Eve, it had finally found its victims. Sarah didn't escape. No one did. The house remains empty, abandoned, a place where the darkness lingers. And every Christmas, the whispers can still be heard calling for the next soul who dares to open their door to the unknown. So, the next time you hear something strange on Christmas Eve, before you open the door, remember this story. Not every Christmas gift is wrapped with care. Some are meant to be left alone. Every year, Christmas brings families together with traditions that bring joy, love, and warmth. It's a season of cheer, kindness, and the hope of a fresh start in the new year. But there's a dark side to Christmas, something that's been hiding, just waiting for the right time to be unleashed. Not every Christmas story ends with a happy resolution, and some things, once they've been awakened, will never be put back to sleep. This is the story of a family whose Christmas night took a turn for the worse, when they discovered that some ancient traditions should never be disturbed. So, if you're thinking of settling down for a peaceful Christmas this year, you might want to hear this first. It could save your life. It was late in the evening on Christmas Eve when Olivia, her husband Matt, and their 2 children arrived at her grandmother's remote cabin in the woods. They were looking forward to a quiet, peaceful Christmas away from the hustle and bustle of the city. No work calls, no stress, just the 4 of them, together, surrounded by nothing but snow and trees. Her grandmother, an elderly woman who had lived alone in the woods for years, had always kept to herself. She was a bit odd, sure. Strange stories about the old days, dark tales from the past. But they were always dismissed as just that, stories. This Christmas was supposed to be different. But as they settled in for the night, strange things started happening. At first, it was small odd noises coming from the attic above their room, like something heavy was moving around. Matt chalked it up to the house settling, a creaking old cabin. Then, they all noticed the temperature dropping sharply inside the house. Even though the fireplace was roaring, the windows, covered in frost, seemed to grow thicker by the hour, even though the air inside felt colder than the snow outside. Olivia tried to shake it off, but she couldn't help but feel a creeping sense of unease. But things took a more terrifying turn when they found an old journal buried under a pile of blankets in the attic. The journal belonged to her grandmother, and as Olivia began to read it, she realized that her grandmother's stories weren't just stories at all. They were warnings. The journal spoke of something called Krampus, an ancient being tied to the darker side of Christmas, one who didn't bring joy, but punishment. A creature that was said to roam the earth every year on Christmas Eve, punishing those who had been naughty. Her grandmother's journal described the exact same cabin they were staying in. the same snow-covered woods, and a warning that a ritual had been disturbed. And now, Krampus was coming. The problem was clear. They had disturbed something that shouldn't have been touched. And now it was coming for them. The more Olivia and Matt read from the journal, the clearer it became that the creature known as Krampus had been tied to their family for generations. Each year, someone in the family would unknowingly provoke it by breaking a certain rule, often something simple, like lying about a gift or forgetting to leave out milk for Santa. But the rule had been broken in a way that couldn't be undone. It was clear that the more they read, the more they began to understand. Krampus was no fairy tale. It was a curse. And it wasn't just a story, it was coming to life right before their eyes. As they sat by the fire that night, they heard the first real signs that something was wrong. A faint knock on the door. No one should have been out there. They were deep in the woods, miles from the nearest neighbor. Still, they hesitated. The knock came again, and again, and this time, they heard something else, heavy breathing on the other side of the door. Olivia's heart pounded in her chest as she slowly approached the door. She peeked through the crack, but there was nothing there. No footprints in the snow, no one in sight. Yet, as she turned around to walk back inside, a shadow passed across the window, long and menacing, as if someone or something was watching. Then, the lights began flickering. The warmth from the fireplace started to feel like it was being drained, as if the cold itself had entered the room. The house seemed to shudder in fear. Matt, desperate to make sense of the situation, checked the locks on the windows and doors. But as he reached the back door, it burst open on its own. The wind howled through the cabin as a cold, biting air swept through the room. It was then that they heard the bells. Tiny, echoing chimes from deep within the woods, ringing louder and louder with each passing minute. They were here. The power went out. Everything went black. Olivia grabbed her children, pulling them close as the house seemed to tremble. The sound of heavy footsteps on the porch, scraping like claws against wood. And then, a voice, deep and growling, came from the darkness. It wasn't a person. It wasn't even human. Who's been naughty? The door to the cabin slammed open, and standing in the doorway was something that shouldn't have existed. Krampus. He was tall, towering over them, his body covered in fur, his face a grotesque mask of horror. His eyes glowed an unsettling shade of yellow, and his teeth were sharp, more like the fangs of an animal than a man. His horns curled upward, reaching toward the ceiling as his chains clinked with every step. He was real, and he was there for them. The creature's voice echoed again, sending chills down their spines. You have broken the rules. As it stepped closer, the air grew colder, suffocating. The family scrambled, but Krampus was faster. His clawed hand shot out, grabbing Olivia's arm, pulling her toward the door. Matt tried to fight back, but he was no match for the creature's strength. In the chaos, the children screamed, terrified. But it was clear Krampus was taking one of them. The cabin in the woods was abandoned. The snow, now eerily still, covered the ground, hiding the footprints of those who had once lived there. No one ever saw Olivia, Matt, or their children again. The Christmas lights still twinkled, but the house was empty. The Yule demon, Krampus, had claimed his victims. And every year, the cabin would stand as a warning. Some traditions should never be disturbed. Now, as the season approaches, if you find yourself alone in the woods or hear strange noises on Christmas Eve, remember this story. Not all Christmas gifts come wrapped in a bow. If you think this Christmas story is terrifying, wait until you hear what happens next. Hit subscribe and stay tuned for more chilling tales.